Jack rubbed his tired eyes as he pulled into his driveway after a long week on the road. His construction business had taken him to 3 different job sites in neighboring counties, and all he wanted now was a hot shower and his own bed. The early evening sun cast long shadows across his neat front yard as he grabbed his duffel bag from the passenger seat of his work truck. Something white fluttered on his front door, catching his attention. "What now?" he muttered, trudging up the walkway. The official-looking envelope had the Oakwood Estates logo stamped in the corner, making his stomach tighten. Nothing good ever came in these envelopes. Inside his house, Jack tossed his bag on the couch and ripped open the letter. His eyes widened as he read the contents. "You've got to be kidding me," he said to the empty room. The letter stated in cold, formal language that he was being fined $250 for unauthorized vehicle parking in his own driveway. According to some rule he'd never heard of, his work truck, the one he needed to earn a living, now violated HOA guidelines because it was considered a commercial vehicle. Jack sank into his armchair, letter dangling from his fingers. He'd lived here peacefully for 5 years. His truck had been parked in the same spot almost every night for those 5 years. Nothing had changed except the HOA board leadership. He grabbed his phone and called his neighbor Tom. "Hey, did you get one of these ridiculous fines too?" Jack asked when Tom answered. "No. What happened?" Jack explained the situation, his voice rising with each detail. "That's crazy," Tom said. "But I'm not surprised. Ever since Mrs. Wilson took over as president, the fines have been flying around like confetti. She got the Johnsons last week for their basketball hoop, and the elderly couple across from me got written up for having their trash cans out an hour too long." "When did they even make this rule about work trucks?" Jack asked, flipping the paper over as if more information might appear on the back. "No idea. First I'm hearing of it." After hanging up, Jack dug through his files and found the original HOA rule book he'd received when buying the house. He compared it with the letter, which cited Rule 17.3, revision dated 2 months ago. There was nothing about commercial vehicles in his copy. "This isn't right," he said, pacing his living room. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. He'd paid good money for this house. The driveway was his property. The truck was essential for his livelihood. Jack looked out. His front window at his truck, clean, well-maintained, and certainly not an eyesore. It was the same make and model that Mrs. Wilson's husband drove, except Jack's was white with his small business logo on the door, while Mr. Wilson's was black with no markings. "So that's how it is," Jack whispered, a plan already forming in his mind. If they want to play this game, they better be ready for a player who knows all the rules. He circled the date of the next HOA meeting on his calendar. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The community center buzzed with whispered conversations as Jack took a seat in the back row. He clutched a folder containing his fine notice, his property deed, and the original HOA guidelines he'd been given when he bought his house. His palms were sweaty, but his resolve was firm. Patricia Wilson sat at the head table, her silver-rimmed glasses perched on her nose as she called the meeting to order. 4 other board members flanked her, all wearing expressions that seemed permanently set to disapproval. "First item of business," Patricia announced in her clipped tone, "Beautification Committee updates." Jack sat through 40 minutes of mind-numbing discussions about flower types for the community entrance and the appropriate shade of beige for mailbox posts. When they finally opened the floor for resident concerns, he raised his hand immediately. "The chair recognizes Jack Thompson," Patricia said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jack stood, holding up his fine notice. "I'm here about this $250 fine for parking my work truck in my own driveway. I've lived here for 5 years without any issues." Patricia's smile vanished. "The rules clearly state that commercial vehicles are not permitted in residential driveways. It lowers property values." "That rule wasn't in place when I bought my house," Jack replied, keeping his voice steady despite his rising frustration. "And I never received any notification about this change. We posted the rule changes on the community bulletin board as required," board member Doug chimed in, barely looking up from his tablet. "A bulletin board that's inside this building. which is only open during weekday business hours when most of us are at work," Jack pointed out. Several heads nodded in the audience. "The notification requirements were met," Patricia said firmly. The board voted unanimously. "The fine stands." Jack noticed Mr. Wilson's black work truck was identical to his, minus the business logo. "So commercial vehicles aren't allowed, but Mr. Wilson's truck is permitted?" Patricia's face flushed. "That's different. His vehicle doesn't have advertising on it. So if I remove my small business logo, the truck is suddenly acceptable?" Jack asked. "The fine stands," Patricia repeated, her knuckles whitening as she gripped her gavel. "Next concern?" Jack wasn't finished. "I'd like to see the minutes from the meeting where this rule was passed, and proof that proper notification procedures were followed according to state law." The room grew quiet. A few residents exchanged glances. "That information is available to board members only," Doug said. An older gentleman in the front row spoke up. "Actually, state law requires that meeting minutes be made available to all homeowners upon request." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "We'll have our attorney review your request, Mr. Thompson. Until then, your fine is due within 30 days or late fees will apply." As Jack returned to his seat, a woman he recognized from down the street passed him a note with her phone number. "I got fined for my flower pots last month," she whispered. "Call me." By the time Jack left the meeting, 5 different neighbors had given him their contact information. Each had their own story of arbitrary rule enforcement. Walking to his truck, Jack felt a new determination. This wasn't just about his driveway anymore. Something wasn't right with this HOA, and he wasn't going to rest until he figured out what it was. Jack spread his papers across the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee forgotten at his elbow. His laptop glowed in the dim evening light as he typed HOA regulations, followed by his state's name into the search bar. He'd been at this for 3 nights straight after work, diving into a world of legal jargon he never thought he'd need to understand. "This can't be right," he muttered, comparing the state requirements with what he'd experienced. According to the law, HOAs had to provide written notice to all homeowners before implementing new rules. A small posting on a rarely visited bulletin board definitely didn't cut it. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Lisa, the woman who'd slipped him her number at the meeting. "Found something interesting. Can I email you?" 10 minutes later, Jack was staring at photos Lisa had taken over the past 6 months. They showed various board members, homes with apparent violations, holiday decorations left up too long, unapproved yard ornaments, and most interestingly, Mr. Wilson's truck parked in his driveway. Jack leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. The pieces were starting to fit together. His doorbell rang, startling him. It was Tom from next door holding a 6-pack. "Thought you might need this," Tom said, placing the beer on the counter. "Any luck with your research?" Jack showed him what he'd found so far. They're not following proper procedures for rule changes according to state law. And look at this selective enforcement. Wilson gets away with the same truck I have, just because his doesn't have a logo. Tom nodded, taking a swig of his beer. "You know, my cousin works in real estate law. Want me to give him a call?" The next afternoon, Jack sat in a small office downtown, explaining his situation to Tom's cousin Dave. "So they're making up rules without proper notice and enforcing them selectively?" Dave asked, making notes. "Exactly," Jack replied. "And I've got at least 6 neighbors with similar stories." Dave looked up, his expression thoughtful. "You know, this isn't just about your fine anymore. This could be a case of board misconduct." Jack leaned forward. "What can I do about it?" "Document everything, get statements from your neighbors, request all meeting minutes from the past year. They're legally required to provide them. And whatever you do, don't pay that fine yet." Jack left the office with renewed purpose. That evening, he created an email group for the neighbors who had approached him and set up a meeting at his house for the weekend. By Saturday afternoon, his living room was packed. 12 neighbors showed up, each with their own tale of HOA harassment. "They fined me for my kid's swing set," said an exhausted-looking dad. "Called it an unauthorized structure. I got written up for wind chimes. added an elderly woman, after they were approved 3 years ago. As Jack listened to each story, he carefully documented dates, amounts, and alleged violations. A pattern emerged. The new board was using fines as a revenue stream, targeting certain homeowners while ignoring violations by others. "We're stronger together," Jack told the U group. "If one person fights, they can dismiss it, but if half the neighborhood challenges them with evidence of their misconduct, that's a different story." For the first time since receiving that fine, Jack smiled. This wasn't just his battle anymore. The Sunday afternoon sun streamed through Jack's kitchen window as he added another name to his growing list. His phone buzzed with yet another text from a neighbor wanting to join their cause. "That makes 28 households," he told Tom, who was helping him organize the stack of statements they'd collected. Almost a third of the neighborhood. What had started as a personal battle had grown into something bigger. Kitchen table meetings became front yard gatherings. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now greeted each other warmly, united by a common goal. Jack created a private Facebook group where residents could share their experiences safely. Posts poured in. Photos of selective enforcement, copies of unreasonable fines, and screenshots of the state laws the HOA was violating. "Look at this," said Beth, a quiet woman from 2 streets over, showing Jack her phone during one of their meetings. "I took these pictures last weekend. Patricia's daughter has 3 cars parked in her driveway and on the street, but the Johnsons got fined for having their adult son's car overnight when he visited from college." Jack added it to their evidence file. "The more examples we collect, the stronger our case." The group decided to divide responsibilities. Tom and a few others would research the HOA's financial records, which were supposed to be available to all homeowners. Another team would compare the current rules with state regulations. Jack took on the task of finding more residents who had been unfairly targeted. One evening, while walking his dog, Jack spotted an elderly man struggling with yard work. The man's name was Bill, and he'd lived in the neighborhood since it was built. "Getting my yard in order," Bill explained, wiping sweat from his brow. "Got my 3rd warning this month about my grass being too long. One more and they'll fine me." Jack frowned. "Have you always had trouble keeping up with yard work?" "Just since my arthritis got bad," Bill said. "Used to hire a service but had to stop after my wife's medical bills last year. I've been doing my best." Jack's anger burned even hotter. Targeting an elderly man dealing with health and financial challenges? This wasn't about property values. It was harassment. The next day, 5 neighbors showed up at Bill's house with lawnmowers, trimmers, and gardening tools. They tackled his yard together, finishing in under 2 hours what would have taken Bill days of painful work. As they packed up their tools, several other neighbors walked by, curious about the activity. "Just helping a neighbor," Jack explained. "That's what communities are supposed to do, right? Support each other?" By the end of the week, 3 more elderly or struggling homeowners had received similar help. What began as resistance against the HOA was evolving into true community spirit. During their next group meeting, attendance had nearly doubled. Jack looked around his crowded living room, amazed at how many faces he now recognized and how many stories he'd heard. "I never even knew half of you before this," he admitted to the group. "Kind of ironic that the HOA's bullying is what brought us all together." A woman in the back raised her hand. "I work for the local newspaper. Have you thought about making this public?" Jack exchanged glances with Tom. They'd been focused on legal challenges, but maybe it was time to try a different approach. "Tell me more," he said. Jack sat at his kitchen table surrounded by papers, his laptop open to a half-finished email. He was drafting a formal complaint to the State Housing Authority, choosing each word carefully. This wasn't just about his truck anymore. It was about holding the HOA board accountable for all their residents. "You sure about this?" Tom asked, looking over Jack's shoulder. "Once we file this, there's no going back." Jack nodded firmly. "I'm sure. Look at what we found." Their research had revealed more than just procedural violations. The financial records they'd finally obtained showed questionable spending, expensive dinners labeled as board meetings, personal travel disguised as HOA conferences, and a suspicious pattern of hiring companies connected to board members' families for neighborhood projects. They've been using our dues as a personal piggy bank while harassing people with ridiculous fines, Jack said. It has to stop. The complaint included everything: the improperly enacted rules, the selective enforcement, the financial discrepancies, and statements from over 30 homeowners. Jack had even included photos comparing properties with similar violations where only certain residents received fines. What if they try to retaliate? Lisa asked when Jack shared his plan with the core group. That's why I'm sending copies to every homeowner, Jack explained. Transparency is our best protection. They can't target all of us. The following morning, Jack hit send on the email to the State Housing Authority. He took a deep breath as he watched the confirmation appear on his screen. Then he printed 90 copies of the complaint and supporting evidence, placing each in an envelope. That evening, Jack and 5 neighbors split up the neighborhood, placing envelopes in mailboxes. As Jack walked from house to house, he noticed Patricia Wilson watching him from her window, her face pinched with suspicion. The reaction was swift. His phone began ringing the very next day as neighbors read through the evidence. Many were shocked by the financial information. Some shared additional stories of harassment. A few worried about property values if this became public. 3 days later, Jack received another fine notice, this time for distributing unauthorized materials in mailboxes. The fine was $500. He laughed when he saw it. They just made our case stronger, he told Tom, adding the notice to their evidence file. The State Housing Authority responded within a week, confirming they would investigate the complaint. They requested an in-person hearing with both the HOA board and the complainants, scheduled for the following month. Meanwhile, Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting. Jack and his allies arrived early, claiming seats in the front row. The room was packed, with residents standing along the walls. Patricia banged her gavel, her voice tight with anger. It has come to the board's attention that false and damaging information has been circulated about our management of this community. A man in the back spoke up. Is it true you spent $5,000 of our dues on a weekend retreat for the boar? The community center was packed on the day of the Housing Authority hearing. Residents filled every chair with latecomers standing against the walls. At the front of the room, a table had been set up for the state representative, a serious-looking woman named Ms. Reynolds. Jack's stomach tightened with nerves as he organized his documents. The past week had been tense in the neighborhood, with the board sending out a mass email calling his claims baseless and an attack on property values. A few neighbors had backed away from the fight, worried about becoming targets themselves. But most had stayed strong. In fact, more had joined after seeing the board's defensive reaction. Ms. Reynolds called the meeting to order, her voice calm but authoritative. We're here to address formal complaints filed against the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association regarding rule enforcement, procedural violations, and financial discrepancies. Patricia sat with the other board members, her face a mask of confidence. She had brought their attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who immediately tried to take control. These complaints are without merit, he began. The board has acted within its rights to preserve community standards. Ms. Reynolds cut him off politely. We'll hear evidence from both sides before making any determinations. Jack was called to present first. He had practiced for days, but his voice still shook as he began. Taking a deep breath, he focused on the facts. The HOA board has failed to follow proper notification procedures for rule changes, he explained, displaying copies of the state regulations alongside the HOA's actions. They've also enforced rules selectively, targeting certain homeowners, while ignoring similar violations by others. He presented photos, documentation, and resident statements. With each piece of evidence, whispers rippled through the crowd. When he showed the financial records revealing questionable expenses, the whispers turned to murmurs of outrage. These aren't just technical violations, Jack concluded. This is a pattern of mismanagement and abuse of power that has hurt our community. When Patricia's turn came, her usual confidence seemed diminished. Her attorney did most of the talking, focusing on technicalities rather than addressing the substance of the complaints. The board has broad discretion in interpreting and enforcing rules, he insisted. As for the financial questions, those were legitimate business expenses. Ms. Reynolds listened carefully, taking notes throughout. When both sides had finished, she addressed the room. Based on the evidence presented, I'm prepared to make a preliminary finding, she said. The documentation shows clear violations of state regulations regarding HOA governance. She listed the violations one by one: improper notification procedures, selective enforcement, questionable financial practices, and retaliation against residents who raised concerns. All fines issued under improperly enacted rules are hereby nullified, she announced. Additionally, the HOA will be placed under temporary supervision to ensure compliance with state regulations. The room erupted in applause. Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him as neighbors patted his back and shook his hand. Patricia stormed out, her face flushed with anger. The other board members followed, looking stunned. As the crowd began to disperse, Ms. Reynolds approached Jack. "This is one of the most thoroughly documented complaints I've seen," she said quietly. "Your community is fortunate to have someone willing to stand up when things aren't right." 2 years had passed since the Housing Authority hearing. Jack pulled into his driveway, his work truck still sporting his company logo. He smiled as he noticed his neighbor Bill waving from across the street, while watering a vibrant garden that would have earned fines under the old regime. The neighborhood had transformed. After Patricia and 3 other board members resigned, a special election brought fresh faces to the HOA leadership. Jack had reluctantly agreed to run and now served as treasurer, ensuring financial transparency above all else. Their first act had been to revisit the rulebook. For 6 weeks, residents gathered in the community center for open workshops. People who had once been afraid to speak up now confidently shared their ideas. The elderly, families with children, small business owners, all had a voice in shaping their community's standards. "The point isn't to have no rules," Jack had explained during one heated discussion. "It's to have rules that make sense for the people who actually live here, not just what looks good on paper." The new guidelines were practical: reasonable quiet hours, basic property maintenance standards, and simple procedures for requesting changes to one's property. Most importantly, they created a fair enforcement process with clear appeals procedures. Today was the neighborhood's 2nd annual community picnic, an event that would have been impossible under the old board, who had rejected it as potentially disruptive. Jack grabbed the cooler from his truck bed and headed toward the park at the center of the development. Colorful tables dotted the grass, loaded with potluck dishes. Children raced around a newly installed playground, while teenagers helped elderly residents set up chairs in the shade. Tom approached, carrying a platter of grilled corn. "Remember when we were afraid to let our kids play outside because Patricia might write us up for excessive noise?" He laughed. "Hard to believe that was the same place," Jack replied. Lisa joined them, her dog on a leash beside her. Pets had once been restricted to backyards only. "Just got the quarterly financial report. The reserve fund is healthier than it's been in a decade, even with the playground and the new landscaping. Amazing what happens when you don't spend community money on emergency board retreats to Florida," Jack said with a grin. A young couple approached, new residents who had moved in just last month. "We wanted to thank you," the woman said. "Our last neighborhood was a nightmare. The HOA there fined us for everything. We were afraid to buy here until our agent told us about the changes you all made." Jack shook his head modestly. "It wasn't just me. It took everyone standing together." As the afternoon sun softened, residents gathered for the group photo that would hang in the community center. Jack found himself in the middle, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends. Bill stood beside him, leaning on his cane. "You know what the best thing is?" the older man asked. "It's not just that the bad rules are gone. It's that we actually know each other now. That's what a neighborhood should be." Jack nodded, looking around at the community they had rebuilt together. Sometimes giving someone a taste of their own medicine wasn't about revenge. It